Okay, so bear with us. We're going to take something very silly a little too seriously. Somebody asked on a live stream for Swamp Dweller what round to use or what round is recommended for hunting cryptids. This is the first bit of advice I would say. Know the law. Know before you go. Is there a general ban on having firearms? For a long time, if you took a firearm into a U.S. national park, that was a felony. Now, are there permits required? Are there class restrictions? Are there magazine restrictions? Are there ammo type restrictions? Some places have banned the use of lead ammo. Others, like New Jersey, have a ban on jacketed hollow points or hollow point ammunition, which means you have to use full metal jacket. Other places, you're allowed to bring a firearm as long as you have a hunting permit. If you are out in an area and it's not hunting season, you can't have a firearm. Or if it's bow season and you have a firearm in the woods, you're in deep trouble. Class restrictions, some places say shotguns only. Other places say straight wall cartridges only. Other places you have to have certain sizes or certain caliber requirements. Magazine restrictions. Yeah, if you have more than 5 rounds, can you have more than 10 rounds? Are you limited to just 3 rounds in a shotgun? And of course, the ammo restriction. There is a lot of nonsense there. Okay, let's talk about some class or some pistol ammunition here in a second. Okay, now when talking about pistols, there are a couple of different types to talk about. There are the concealed carry, there are service, and then there are heavy, and there are a bunch of classes in between. Now they divide up usually into 3 other ways: single shot, semi-automatic, or revolver. Let's take a look at some of the rounds that you'll find for them. At the bottom end here of the pea shooter scale, we have the .22 long rifle. You'll find this as a little plinker for revolvers, for semi-autos. These are notoriously unreliable. Not that they don't work, but they're much more prone to have failure to fires. In fact, that's the source of pretty much all the ones my teaching collection is. Those were duds that failed to fire. Next up, here's an oldie but a goodie that we don't really see anymore, thankfully, but they're still out there and some people might find a little pocket pistol. The .32 ACP. This is a semi-rimless. This is a rimmed. Basically, these two I would not recommend. Next up, we have the 380, also known as 9x17, 9mm Browning, also 9mm quartz. This is the small end of what you find currently on sale in most places for a self-defense firearm. A little concealed carry vest pistol is what they used to be called. Nowadays you'd say a purse pistol, a pocket pistol, something like that. Next on the list, I don't actually have any revolvers in stock. I don't have any samples of the ammunition as for my training collection right now, but .38 Special. This is where we're starting to get serious. This is the lightest revolver round that people would consider using. It's a little bit bigger than the 9mm Parabellum, but it fires about the same size round. In fact, The only difference between the 38 Special and the 357 Magnum is the length of the case, not the diameter. All three of these fire 36 caliber projectiles. Next up, in the early 1900s, Georg Luger sold the Luger pistol to the German government, but they didn't like the 30 caliber round. So in 1908, they adopted a rimless, semi-automatic 9mm 36 caliber projectile to use in the so it becomes known as 9mm Parabellum, P08 ammunition in Germany, 9x19 based on the length of the case here versus 9x17, and it works pretty darn well. The Germans still use it to this day. In fact, it's become a world standard. It's actually experienced something of revival because the FBI in recent testing has determined that the newest generation of 9mm rounds are just as effective, if not more effective, than all the other ones on the market. Take that with a grain of salt. I'm going to include a link to a presentation by another gentleman who actually tested that claim. Now, 357 Magnum, like I said before, it is a lengthened, higher pressure version of the 38 Special, 36 caliber slug, roughly 9mm. This is a serious self-defense. This was a standard police round for many decades. The 40 Smith & Wesson came to prominence in the early 90s after the 1986 Miami-Dade shootout and the FBI wanting to adopt a more powerful round, only to find that the 10mm was too powerful for their army of lawyers and accountants that they gave badges to. So they couldn't qualify with their service firearms. So instead of upping the training, they reduced the powder load. Then Smith & Wesson said, hey, you know, we take that reduced powder load, we don't need all this extra case space. We make a smaller round, it's smaller, easier to fit in a magazine, and we can make a better, quote-unquote, better firearm based on it. So that becomes 40 Smith & Wesson. Next up, 45 ACP. This actually is younger than the P08 Luger, being standardized in 1911. It actually comes out in a number of things. A lot of people will argue which is better, 45 ACP or 9mm. Most of the time when you're talking military, you're talking full metal jacket rounds like you see here, in which case the 45 does perform better. It is a bigger, heavier round, it does travel slower, but it does have more kinetic energy dispersal into the target upon impact, whereas 9mm tends to over-penetrate in some cases. Now, next up, the 10mm. In the 70s, as semi-autos were becoming more popular and more reliable, somebody got the bright idea that the 41 Magnum needed a semi-automatic update. So they made 10mm. This got a huge splash in the 80s. Don Johnson in Miami Vice carried a 10mm. The FBI briefly adopted 10mm and then went to 40 Smith & Wesson. A couple of police departments also adopted it. It's also seen something of a revival lately. SIG fully supporting 10mm when they don't even really support their own 357 SIG anymore. That's a whole nother story. But There we go, 10 millimeter. Now, next up, again, I don't have revolvers. I don't have any revolver rounds in my training collection. 44 Magnum. This is the other popular option in dealing with big pests in the woods. In Alaska, you get reports of people either carrying full-size service pistols or heavy pistols, semi-automatics in 10 millimeter, or carrying revolvers in 44 Magnum. There is a 44 Special round out there, but it's extremely hard to find ammunition for, and it's also kind of hard to find firearms actually chambered in 44 Special and not 44 Magnum / 44 Special. Now, here's a special one for you. If you ever play video games and they have that big Desert Eagle, that 50 cal pistol, this is what it shoots, 50 Action Express. What it is, 1/2 inch. They made a Magnum for an automatic. We have a rimless round, partial jacketed hollow point, as opposed to most of these on display here being a lead jacket or a lead slug. Now, when we get into some discussions about what makes them more effective, well, certain things do make these bullets more effective. A soft lead nose is known to be more effective than a full metal jacket. And what's called a hollow point, something like this, where, let me just get a little pick to illustrate the point. Now, where we have a cavity in the projectile, this allows for the projectile to expand, blossom out, increasing the diameter of the round as it's going through the target. Some companies have created ballistic polymer inserts that keep the cavity from being clogged up when it hits interfering material, such as jeans, jackets, pants, stuff like that, and makes it so the round expands once it's already past all the material and in the flesh, as opposed to starting to expand before it hits the flesh. Now, like I said, the FBI has said that the 9mm, the latest generations, are just as effective as everyone else. Well, the problem is they have that technology for the better bullet design in other calibers. That was a 10mm. And just to show you, here is a Ready Mag with a 45 featuring that same high-tech bullet. Give me a second, we'll switch over to the next category. Okay, discussion about shotguns. Now, there are a couple of different types. There's 410, 20, 16, 12, and 10. And yes, the 410 and the 20 are closer to the pea shooter end of the scale than the overkill end, whereas the 10 and the 12 are closer to the overkill than the pea shooter. How it works is the bigger the number, the smaller the diameter. A gauge is based on how many lead balls that diameter it takes to make a certain weight. I believe it's a full 1 pound. So a 1 gauge is a fairly big one, whereas a 100 gauge is absolutely minuscule. Now, there are a couple of different options here. This is a double odd buck. The way it's constructed, you have a brass base down here where the powder is. You have a wad, little plastic insert that holds the pellets in there, and it's all crimped off here at the top. Now there are a couple of different options you have. Heavy field load. This is for like pheasant, turkey. These use very small pellets, but a lot of them. Then you have buckshot, which are larger pellets, 15 versus, doesn't even say how many, just 1 1/8 ounce. And then you have slugs. Let me just show you one of these on the inside. That's just one huge lead slug, mostly shaped like an oversized bullet. Now, where these are best useful is short range, full knockdown power. This is what you can use for deer hunting, especially in close in. These are also good for deer hunting. This is better for moose hunting than this. This is better for like pheasant and all sorts of small game like that. That's just a quick little thing. My recommendation, 12 gauge if you get one with a 3.5 inch chamber. You'll find plenty of options there for 3 inches. This one is for the 3-inch Magnum chamber. These are for 2 3/4 inch. You can find them in 2.5, 2 3/4, 3, and 3.5 inch chambers. That's the length from the rim here to the end here. You can put a smaller one in there and it'll still work fine, but there you go. Okay, so bear with me because this is some stuff that's not going to be on here again, and some stuff that is on here, and I'm going to go into a little bit more detail. So, generally speaking, there are a couple of different versions of rifles. You have plinking, which are these little rimfire ones. These are good for training, hunting small game. They're also issued as survival rifles. You'll find them in 22 long rifles, 17 HMR, 22 Magnum or WMR. These are rimfire, which means, again, the primer is in the rim of the case. Now, these are generally not recommended for anything above the size of, say, a coyote or a badger, and a small badger at that. So I'm not going to recommend any of these if you're out there searching for Sasquatch or Dogman or anything else like that. Now, next group is pistol caliber carbine. What does that mean? Well, that means we are going to be talking about the 45 and the 9mm yet again, and the 357 Magnum and the 44 Magnum yet again, because these are very common for shoulder arms. So they look like a rifle, but instead of firing a rifle round, they're firing a pistol caliber, hence pistol caliber carbine. Now the 44 Magnum and 357 Magnum, you're going to find those most often in lever actions. In a lot of semi-autos, you'll see a lot of 45s and a metric goat load of ones chambered for 9x19. or 9mm Luger. Those are the most common. You will find some out there in 380. In this case, 380 actually becomes practical, and you'll find them in 10mm or 40 Smith & Wesson. Again, these are pistol calibers, but they are out of the longer barrel, so you get a little bit more oomph and burn. Now, we're going to skip another section and go right to rifles, because I need to talk about these shortly first. Now, in rifles, these standards were set beginning of the 20th century, really. Somewhere between 6mm and 9mm, they established as the diameters. These are what they called full-powered rifle cartridges. So many, equivalent to so many grains of black powder. Now, these all are very different on the individual by individual basis, but we'll talk about a few here. First up is 6.5 Japanese Imperial Military Cartridge, also known as 6.5 Arasaka, and a couple of others. But this, as well as 6.5 Swedish, usually represent the bottom end of what were standard military service cartridges as far as the diameter. Now, next to that, we would have a 270. I don't have one in stock, and I don't carry the ammunition. A lot of my samples are from World War II or more current conflicts, and that was purely a commercial round. This one is used as a smaller diameter, flat shooting, long range hunting round for deer. It's used quite often in places where you have large open distances. Then you have 4570, which is an old black powder round. This is commonly used in what we call brush guns, because it is a 45 caliber, wide diameter round with a big heavy charge behind it. Now, next up on there is a rimmed round, the 7.62x54 Russian Imperial, 7.62x54 rimmed, 7.62 Russian. It goes by a couple of different names. This was adopted with the Mosin Nagant way back before the turn of the 20th century by the Russian Imperial government as a standard rifle cartridge. It remains in service today with was in service with the Soviet military as their standard rifle cartridge, and it is still in service today with the Russian Federation as their standard rifle cartridge, and it is used in their belt-fed medium general purpose machine guns. Alright, this is also a good choice. 6.5 Japanese and 270, I don't know if I'd want to use those hunting for Bigfoot, but they're out there, they're full-powered rifles. Now, 308 Winchester and 7.62 NATO. These two rounds look almost identical to you behind the screen. I can assure you, they are almost identical. What happened was, in the late 40s, early 50s, they took a look at the 30-06 and realized, hey, that was developed in 1906. Technology's improved. We can make a 30-06 in a smaller case. Well, 7.62 NATO is the mil-spec, heavier brass, higher pressure, and a slightly different neck than the 308 Winchester. The 308 Winchester being the commercial version. If you have a rifle marked 7.62 NATO, you can fire either. If you have a rifle marked 308, do not fire 7.62x54 cartridges. you can damage your firearm. It has a much higher pressure. Now, 30-06. 30-06 is comparable to 7.62 Russian. These are similar generation. These are full-powered service rounds. In fact, they are comparable to 303 British and 8mm Mauser. They are not identical. They will not shoot interchangeably, but they're roughly the same. They have the same kind of setup. They were designed for between 300 and 500 yards, be able to shoot well past that 500 yard, 500 meter, 500 arcing range, but they were designed for long range, full power service use. Now, 30-06 is rated for just about everything in North America. Polar bears, all the way through. You can use it on just about anything. And there is a reasonable expectation that you will achieve a one-shot kill on most things in North America with the 30-06. Now, that reasonable expectation of a one-shot kill is important because that plays into laws. Now, stepping back, intermediate carbines, or intermediate cartridges. There are 3 ways to make them. 1, take an existing round and shrink it down. Take a small diameter round and pack a lot of powder behind it. Or take a pistol round and blow it up. Let's start with the 30 carbine. 30 carbine was a pistol caliber round that was blown up. The M1 carbine started from a requirement, hey, you know what would be awesome? If we had some of those artillery Lugers like the Germans used in the last war in 357 Magnum. Well, they didn't get an artillery Luger in 357 Magnum. Instead, what they got was a light rifle to issue to support troops in 30 carbine. Not as wide as the 36 caliber round in the 357 or the 9mm, but it's more powerful than the standard 30 caliber pistol rounds that they were dealing with at the time. This one is kind of iffy, depends on what situation you're in, but I wouldn't trust my life dealing with Bigfoot or Dogman or anything else that big with the 30 carbine, so sorry. Now, would I have a problem hunting Bambi with it? Yeah, close in, it would work fine, but again. Now, next up, small diameter, high velocity. The 223 Remington and 5.56 by 45 was like the 308, an upgraded, modernized version of the old 22250 or 2250 round. It fires a 22 caliber, less than a 1/4 inch round diameter slug at a very high speed. Now, the military adopted a thicker brass version with a slightly heavier weight bullet. This became the military 5.56 and later the NATO standard. It's also got a version out there of French service and a couple of others. Now, 223 Remington is the commercial spec. Like the military, if you have a barrel marked 223, you can fire the 223 Remington. And you can tell these because they have 223 Remington on the head cape or on the butt of the cartridge. But the military If it has 5.56, then it's rated for the higher pressure loads, in which case you can use either or. Now the military version, you can tell it's at the full power NATO load because it will have a circle with a cross, sort of like crosshairs in a scope. That will be on the military full power version, whereas the 223 will have 223 Remington. Now, the Soviets developed their own version, 5.45 by 3.9. I don't have one, but I do have a snap cap because I've had to do a number of discussions on Soviet rounds and Soviet firearms. This is in use with the Russian Federation today. I don't recommend any of these three if you're going in looking for Bigfoot. They do not have a reasonable expectation of a one-shot kill on anything bigger than 100 pounds. A number of states actually will charge you with animal cruelty if you use a 223 Remington round to hunt deer. That being said, now next up is a medium caliber reduced length 30-30. I don't have one here, but this was one developed way back when as this kind of light 30 smaller diameter round, about the time they were starting to work on the 30 Craig. This is a quintessential brush gun type round. It's a round nose bottleneck cartridge. Works perfectly well. Highly recommend it. It is one of the most popular deer hunting rifle rounds in North America, especially in the eastern forests. Now, next up, 7.62 by 39. In World War II, the Soviets took the 7.62 Russian. They took that same 30 cal round and they made a modern rimless bottleneck cartridge with reduced power for use at close range. These are best between 3 and 300 yards, meters, whereas these tend to be more effective at 300 to 500. Now, a lot of people want a AR-15 with more oomph because they view 5.56 and 223 as anemic. Well, for them, they developed 300 Blackout, where they took the bullet from a 308 and they mounted it in a brass from 5.56 by 45, and they made this thing. Now, you can either get them in supersonic, which replicates or is meant to replicate the ballistics of 7.62 by 39. Doesn't quite work out, but it's close. Or you can get a subsonic version for use with a muzzled firearm. Put a muffler on the end of it. Hollywood calls it a silencer, but it isn't quiet at all. That becomes ideal for that use. 300 Blackout. Now, 50 BMG is over here in the overkill section, because unless you're dealing with a herd of a whole troop or parliament of Bigfoot coming at you, or an entire pack of Dogman, I wouldn't recommend 50 BMG. And if you are in that situation, I wouldn't recommend a man-portable rifle. I'd recommend a crew-served machine gun in 50 BMG. But, you know, this is really, in order to fire one of these, it requires a lot more mass and built up of the rifle than is effectively practical to carry around, especially searching through the woods for whatever cryptid. So I'm not recommending 50 BMG in this application. On top of that, that thing, the cheapest price I've ever found, is $5 a pop. So, and you don't even want to think about how much the rifles to fire them cost. So, .45-70, yeah, it's an old black powder, but I recommend it. .270, not so much. .762 Russian, yeah, I can see it. .30-06, yeah. .308 and .762 NATO, sure. Now if you're in dense brushland, okay. .30-30, .762 by .39, 300 blackout. If you're in close, I wouldn't recommend necessarily .270 or 6.5. So, and if you have a pistol caliber, I'd probably say get one in .45 or .44 Magnum. So, all right, give me a second. We'll be back with a few more thoughts. Okay, some other thoughts and considerations. Are you going to be hunting in brush, heavy, thick vegetation, or out in fairly open terrain? Are you going to be hunting, or are you going to be working out in the woods? Are you going to be working in the hills? Are you going to be on steppes, the tundra? This all has a big thing, because how far away you're going to be able to see something is really going to affect just what kind of response you're going to need. For instance, there's a cartridge called 50 Beowulf, which looks a bit like the 50 Action Express, except it takes up the entire length here, so it's just that bit longer. That's designed basically to deal with anything coming at you at, oh crap, it's just further away than my arm distance. Now, if you have more of an open terrain, you may want to go with more of a far-reaching round. Whereas if you are dealing with something up close and personal, you probably want something that's just going to have at it and knock it back, which is where shotguns accelerate. Now, original design magazine versus punted compliance magazine. This is a Heckler & Koch made G3/Setme pattern magazine. This is what the designers originally came up with. 20 rounds, and in order to service it and take it apart and clean it, all I have to do is pop, push, give me a second here, slide, and I can clean out the magazine. And put it back together. Just had to compress the spring. Boom. Now, the 5-round compliance magazine, I've never been able to get this open, so there's all sorts of gunk in here. If I try to press this follower, it takes a lot of effort because they're using Lord knows what kind of spring in there. And take it apart, I'm tried popping this up and sliding it out, but I've never been able to. Again, the other factor, This is 25 bucks if you can find it. This is less than $5, and you can find it pretty much anywhere you go online. This is a legal compliance. This is in order to stay legal. This is what the manufacturer designed the firearm to use. Now, the other big factor here are going to be the bullet design. There are a couple of different designs for rounds. Have here an example of full metal jacket, where it's got a brass case that goes all the way over. This is better for penetration, but it's less effective when you're up close and personal. It doesn't expand. Now you have soft point, which means it's got lead exposed at the tip, and what this does is when it hits, that lead deforms and it starts to expand out, creating a bigger wound cavity. And finally, you have jacketed hollow points. These are where you have a cavity in there that increases the size of the wound cavity because it causes the entirety of the round to expand out. Let's just put this one for right there because it's a full rifle round. Now again, some places these are limited, other places they are unrestricted. Generally speaking, the jacketed hollow point isn't going to penetrate as much, but it also is going to cause a bigger wound cavity. Now the last factor to consider, the other gear factor. Are you going backpacking through the Sierra Madre Mountains looking for whatever? Are you just pulling up in a Jeep Cherokee, grabbing a day pack and camera and a firearm and going out into the woods? That's going to affect what you can have. There's a reason why in Alaska, one of the big ones for dealing with bears is the Glock Model 20. See, it's empty. This is 10 millimeter, semi-auto, so you can reload on the fly. And the other big one is a 44 Magnum. This weighs less than most 44 Magnums I've encountered. But it's also a lot easier to carry. In addition to that, Glock also makes a Model 29. Again, unloaded, which is a small concealed carry size, or what they call subcompact. Double stack magazine, so we got 10 rounds of 10 millimeter that is able to be stored away. So you have service pistol size, then they have what they call compact, which are in between the service pistol and subcompact. This is the FBI detective size. Then the subcompact, and nowadays we're reintroducing the idea of the pocket pistol with single stack small form pistols in 9mm for concealed carry self-defense use. Again, this may or may not be legal depending on your jurisdiction. Alright, so big takeaway first, foremost and always, know the laws. Know before you go. Are you going to be able to carry a rifle, a carbine, a shotgun? These will be big factors in which round you should take. What other gear are you going to take? Is that going to limit you to a sidearm or a long arm? Again, I can't tell you what the right answer is. I've given you some recommendations. Don't take me as legal advice. Contact a lawyer before you try anything. I'm out.